The wind screamed through the bare trees like a warning, sharp and unrelenting. Dunsgrave, Maine, a forgotten town nestled between hills and silence, lay draped in early November frost. At its edge stood a weathered, skeletal mansion, Whitmore House, its windows blind with dust, its woodwork sagging like tired bones. Yet one window on the second floor was always clear, and within it townsfolk swore a chair rocked. No one lived there, not since 1907. Children dared each other to approach the rusted gate, but none stepped beyond the fence twice. The adults avoided its path entirely. In the heart of this hush, whispers spread, of cries in the night, of flickering lights where no power flowed, and of a chair that moved with the windless air. If chilling tales like this fascinate you, make sure to subscribe for more terrifying mysteries uncovered. Evelyn Markham leaned against the frame of the Dunsgrave Public Library, arms crossed, notebook in hand. She was out of place, her tailored coat too sharp, her voice too direct, her presence too curious. At 28, she had made a name for herself in Boston as a journalist, unafraid of the dark. But the city had gone quiet. Stories had thinned. So when the letter arrived, unsigned, untraceable, and soaked in the scent of mildew, her instincts sharpened. It read, "Come to Dunsgrave, find the chair. Learn what no one else dares remember." She had boarded the train the next morning. The librarian, a hunched woman named Myra, eyed Evelyn suspiciously as she requested town archives. "Nothing good ever came from poking at Whitmore House," she muttered, sorting yellowed pages with trembling fingers. "Let what's dead rot." But Evelyn smiled politely and pressed forward. "I'm just interested in local history." History, it turned out, was buried beneath layers of silence. Newspaper clippings were brief, vague. Mentions of the Whitmore family ended abruptly after 1907, with Emery Whitmore's disappearance and the presumed death of his wife, Lydia. No bodies had been found, only rumors. One particularly brittle article caught Evelyn's eye. Authorities remain baffled by the sudden absence of Dr. Emery Whitmore, last seen near his property during a thunderstorm. Neighbors report hearing cries, but no signs of foul play have been discovered. Lydia Whitmore remains missing. Locals avoid the home, citing strange occurrences. Evelyn copied the quote into her notebook. Something scratched at her curiosity. Not just the vanishing, but the town's willful forgetfulness. Why did no one want to talk? She found her answer at Harlow's General Store, a peeling wooden structure that sold everything from canned peaches to kerosene lanterns. Inside, Evelyn struck up a conversation with the store's owner, an elderly man with a long face and eyes clouded by more than age. "Thomas Baird," he introduced himself gruffly, noticing the notebook in her hands. "You're here for the house, aren't you?" She hesitated. "I heard stories." His jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have." Thomas poured himself a shot of bourbon from under the counter and drank it without a word. When he finally spoke, it was slow, as though dragging words from a deep well of memory. "When I was a boy," he said, "that house stood proud. Dr. Whitmore was respected, rich even, but after his wife got sick, something changed. People heard crying at all hours. Some claimed Lydia was never allowed to leave. Then came the chair." "The chair?" Evelyn leaned in. Thomas nodded. "Second floor window, always rocking. No one up there. No wind. Just moving. We'd walk by on our way to school and see it. Every morning." Evelyn's heart beat faster. "You saw it yourself." "I wish I hadn't." He looked away. "Sometimes I still hear it, creaking, just outside my window, and I live across town." The conversation ended abruptly when a younger woman entered the store. Thomas grew quiet, his face pale. Evelyn left with a single thought burning behind her eyes. What truly happened in the Whitmore house? As twilight fell, she stood near the edge of the Whitmore property, notebook clutched to her chest. The iron gate was coated in rust, the grass overgrown and blackened by winter's approach. A long driveway curved up toward the house like a beckoning finger. From her vantage point, Evelyn could just make out the second-story window. The chair was there. Still, waiting. And then it rocked. Once. Her breath caught. No one inside. No wind. Evelyn stepped back, heart hammering, a chill worming up her spine. The stories were real. She had come searching for a forgotten mystery, and the Whitmore house had answered with a whisper, "Welcome, Evelyn couldn't sleep, Evelyn." Back in the room she had rented above the post office, the image of the chair rocking lingered behind her eyes. She had watched it sway once, just once, but it had been enough. Her fingers itched to write, yet the page remained blank, as if words couldn't do justice to what she had seen. Not yet. The next morning she returned to the library. Myra watched her from behind the desk with pursed lips, eyes sharp. Evelyn barely acknowledged her, marching to the back where the local records were kept. Hours passed in silence as she scoured every file, every scrap of paper that might shed light on the Whitmore family. Emery Whitmore had been more than a doctor. He was a philanthropist, a scholar, and, oddly, an amateur spiritualist. Evelyn found his name in minutes of town meetings, in donations to the church, even in a report from the Dunsgrave Temperance Society praising his work with the mentally ill. But after Lydia's illness, he vanished from public life. Evelyn noted every date, every change. Emery's final recorded town appearance was October 2nd, 1907. After that, nothing. She flipped through the death records. Lydia's name wasn't listed, nor Emery's. No funerals, no burials. It was as if they had both simply dissolved. She pressed harder, seeking any surviving personal writings. The library's archive index showed a reference to W09 Emery Whitmore Personal Notes. But when she requested it, Myra's mouth pinched tighter. "That file's restricted," she said. "Why?" "No one's read it in decades." "It's locked for a reason." Evelyn stared. "Do you even know what's in it?" "No, and I don't care to." Myra turned away. That night, Evelyn returned after hours. She picked the library's back lock with a hairpin, her breath held tight in her throat. Once inside, she crept through the dark, guided by memory and moonlight, until she reached the archives. Drawer W09 slid open with a reluctant groan. Inside, a small leather notebook, a stack of loose pages, and a single photograph, black and white, faded. Emery stood in the Whitmore house's parlor, hand on the rocking chair. Lydia sat in it, face blurred from age and exposure. Her posture was stiff, hands folded in her lap. She didn't look alive. Evelyn took the notebook. Back in her room, she devoured the pages. Emery's handwriting began clear, then grew erratic. At first, he chronicled Lydia's illness, a slow decline, confusion, muttering, moments of aggression. He spoke of his desperation, his experiments with herbal tinctures, hypnosis, and eventually seances. "She speaks," he wrote, "even in silence. She's with me still. The chair carries her voice." The final entry read, "She won't leave. She rocks and whispers. If I listen long enough, I hear my name. She is not gone, she is changed." Evelyn stared at the words for a long time. The next day she returned to Harlow's. Thomas Baird saw her from the window and stepped outside before she could even open the door. "You shouldn't be here," he warned. "I need to ask you more about the chair, about Lydia." Thomas glanced around, uneasy. "I said too much already." "You were a child when it happened, right?" Evelyn asked. "You saw the rocking chair?" He nodded slowly. "Saw it, heard it. I told my parents once. They said never to speak of it again. They moved us across town within a week." "Why?" Thomas's voice lowered. "Because kids who talked about the chair started hearing things, dreaming things. One boy went mute. Another vanished. They blamed the woods, but we all knew." Evelyn leaned forward. "Did anyone else try to investigate?" He paused, then nodded once. "Two, I remember. A preacher, and a woman from the university, Professor Adeline Crane. Smart, fearless. Said she didn't believe in ghosts. She went into the house. Never came out." Evelyn's pulse quickened. "They never found her?" "Only her scarf." On the porch, the rocking chair was moving when they arrived. Thomas stepped back. "Whatever you're chasing, miss, it doesn't want to be found." But Evelyn was already walking away. That night, the dreams began. She stood in a room she didn't know, but somehow remembered. It smelled of lavender and mildew. A woman sobbed in the corner, her face hidden. A rocking chair moved behind her, creaking with every breath. Evelyn tried to speak, but no sound came. Then the woman turned, and it was her own face staring back. She awoke, gasping. At first, she dismissed it as stress, the pressure of the story, the long days, the disturbing history. But the next night it returned, and the next, each time more vivid, more personal, and always the chair rocked. Evelyn no longer felt like an outsider. The town's silence wasn't just fear, it was defense, it was survival. But she had crossed a threshold that could not be uncrossed. She wasn't just writing the story, she was becoming part of it. The rain began as a whisper against the window pane, soft and steady, as Evelyn turned another brittle page. The more she read, the deeper the shadows stretched around Emery Whitmore's name. Beneath the respectable surface of a doctor, she found a man unraveling, thread by thread. In the dusty archives of Dunsgrave's town hall, she uncovered property records, legal documents, and a handful of letters exchanged between Emery and a distant cousin in Massachusetts. The early letters were composed, intellectual, filled with medical terminology and updates on Lydia's fragile health. But over time, the tone shifted. "Lydia has grown quiet," he wrote. "She stares for hours. When I speak, she does not answer. But when I turn away, I hear her whispering. The rocking chair creaks even when she isn't near it." In a later letter, the cousin begged Emery to send Lydia away to a sanatorium, offering contacts and funds. Emery's reply was curt and dismissive. "She belongs here. No one else can care for her now. We are bound." That phrase, "we are bound," echoed in Evelyn's mind long after she left the building. At the library, Myra remained cold but silent as Evelyn returned to the restricted section. She scanned the town's old journals, collections of local stories and observations. Most had entries that mentioned the Whitmores only in passing, but one caught her attention. A worn journal kept by Reverend Ellis Crane, dated 1906. The Reverend had visited the Whitmore house twice. The first entry described Emery as cordial, if distracted. Lydia, he noted, seemed unwell, thin, pale, withdrawn, but she offered him tea and smiled politely. The second entry was chilling. "She is not the same woman. Her voice comes from the walls. Her presence lingers after she has left the room. And the chair, it rocked the entire visit, back and forth, back and forth. I do not believe in spirits, but I left the house certain something unnatural resides there." That entry ended abruptly. There were no further notes. Evelyn searched for his obituary. He had died less than a month later. Heart failure, 42 years old. Back in her room, Evelyn laid out the pieces. Emery, once a respected figure, descending into isolation and obsession. Lydia slipping into silence, a chair that moved without cause, and a house that repelled the living. She needed to understand more than the end. She needed to find the beginning. That night, her dreams turned darker. She stood on the front porch of the Whitmore house, dressed in a white gown, barefoot. The door creaked open on its own, and inside was not the decaying structure she had seen from afar, but a warm, candle-lit home. A fire crackled. The chair sat near the hearth. Lydia was seated in it, her eyes fixed on Evelyn. "You've come far," she said, her voice both familiar and hollow. Evelyn tried to speak, but Lydia raised a hand. "He lied," she whispered. "He kept me here." The fire flickered violently, and Evelyn woke with a start. The next morning she returned to the general store, determined to push further. Thomas Baird eyed her with resignation as she approached the counter. "You're not leaving, are you?" he asked. "I can't. There's too much buried, too much hidden." Thomas sighed. "Then I'll tell you one last thing. Might help you see the man for what he was." He pulled out a faded newspaper clipping from under the counter and handed it to her. The headline read, "Dr. Whitmore's strange request denied by medical board." The article detailed Emery's attempt to publish a paper on what he called post-mortem consciousness preservation. He had written of experiments on recently deceased patients, theorizing that a strong emotional bond could tether awareness beyond death. The board had dismissed it as macabre pseudoscience. He wasn't trying to save her, Thomas said. He was trying to keep her. Evelyn's throat tightened. Do you think he succeeded? Thomas's eyes grew distant. I think he trapped something in that chair. Whether it's her or something else, that's the part no one dares answer. Evelyn left the store in silence, the clipping folded in her coat pocket. The sky had grown darker, clouds heavy with snow. The road back to her lodging felt longer than before. She passed the Whitmore house once more. The chair sat in the window, and this time it was already rocking. Evelyn stood before the gate of the Whitmore house, breath rising in short clouds, hands clenched in her coat pockets. The sky hung low, heavy with the promise of snow, and the world around her was silent, eerily so. The house loomed at the end of the overgrown path, its windows like eyes, watching. She had read the warnings, heard the stories, and still, something stronger than fear pulled her forward. A local man named Caleb, young and broad-shouldered, had agreed to help, for a price. He didn't ask why she wanted in. He didn't want to know. All he said was, "You get what you came for, you don't ask questions, and you don't go upstairs." Evelyn said nothing in return. With the twist of a key and a grunt of effort, the rusted front door creaked open. Dust billowed out like breath held for too long. The interior was cold and stale, as if the house itself had forgotten how to be alive. Evelyn stepped across the threshold. Inside, decay clung to everything. Wallpaper peeled in long strips. Wooden floors groaned with each footstep. Furniture sat in ghostly stillness beneath tattered white sheets. The air carried the scent of mold, old perfume, and something faintly metallic. Blood, perhaps, or rust too deep to clean. She wandered room by room, flashlight flickering. In the parlor she found a grand fireplace choked with ash. Above it a cracked portrait of Emery Whitmore still hung, his stern eyes faded, his mouth a thin, unreadable line. The room felt untouched since the day it had been abandoned, but it was upstairs she needed to see. She didn't tell Caleb. She waited until he left, mumbling something about getting a drink and not waiting for her, and then, quietly, ascended the stairs. Each step groaned under her weight as if protesting her intrusion. The second floor was colder, the shadows deeper. At the end of the hallway, a door stood slightly ajar. She pushed it open. The room was lit by the dim grey of afternoon, its single window unobstructed by dust or grime. And there, facing it, was the chair. The rocking chair. It was far too pristine. Every other surface in the house was coated in filth, yet the chair gleamed faintly in the light. Its dark wood shone, its cushions looked freshly pressed. It was utterly still. Evelyn stepped inside, heart pounding. The floor creaked once beneath her, then fell silent. She raised her camera and snapped a photo, then another. She circled the chair slowly, careful not to touch it. From this angle she could see the indentation on the cushion, as if someone had only recently risen from it. She crouched down. Something about the floorboards behind it caught her eye. A scratch pattern, repeated, precise. She stood and turned to leave. The chair rocked, one long, slow, deliberate movement forward and back. She froze. No wind, no vibration, no explanation. It rocked again. She backed away, heart hammering so loud she couldn't hear her own breath. Her mind fought to rationalize, maybe an uneven floorboard, maybe a draft. But her body knew better. Her skin crawled, her hands shook. She fled the room. Down the stairs, through the hall, and out the door, she burst into the cold air, lungs burning. Caleb stood at the edge of the property, cigarette dangling from his lips. "You went up there," he said flatly. She didn't answer. Her voice wouldn't work. He didn't press. That night, back in her room, Evelyn reviewed the photos. Most were blurry, streaked with motion or darkness. But one, just one, was perfectly clear. The chair sat as she'd seen it, untouched. But in the window's reflection, something stood behind her. A figure, a woman. Evelyn stared until her eyes burned. She enlarged the image, trying to make sense of the blurred shape. It wasn't her own reflection. This person was taller, thinner, hair long and loose, and the face just faintly, looked like Lydia. The next day, Evelyn bought a battery-powered camera. She set it to record overnight and returned to the house alone. She placed the camera in the corner of the second-floor room, aimed at the chair. Then she left. She didn't sleep. At dawn, she returned and retrieved the footage. She sat at her desk, headphones on, eyes locked to the screen. For hours, nothing happened. Just silence, stillness. The house groaned occasionally, but otherwise remained dead. Then at midnight the chair moved, slow at first, then violently. It rocked forward and back with unnatural speed, as if hurled by invisible hands. In the distance something moaned, a high, keening sound that pierced through the headphones and sent a chill down her spine. Then suddenly it stopped. The chair returned to stillness, but something had changed. Evelyn knew without question. She had been seen. Evelyn replayed the video over and over, each time hoping for a different explanation. But the chair's violent rocking defied logic. There were no strings, no shadows of movement, no breeze to blame. It had moved on its own, angrily, purposefully. And the moan, that sound wasn't mechanical. It wasn't even human, it was grief. Word spread quickly in Dunsgrave. Someone had seen her carrying the camera back from Whitmore House. That afternoon, she entered Harlow's to find conversations halting mid-sentence, heads turned. Thomas Baird wouldn't meet her eyes. She approached the counter anyway. "I saw it move," she said quietly. Thomas stiffened. "Then you need to leave." "I'm not going anywhere." "You think you're chasing a story. But you've opened something we tried for decades to bury. You all knew," she pressed. "You knew it was real." He finally looked at her, and his voice dropped. "We knew enough not to provoke it." Back at the library, Myra had locked the archive cabinet. Evelyn found her in the reading room and asked for access. "Denied," she said flatly. "It's not just a story." "It's dangerous." Myra's lips tightened. "That's exactly why you need to stop." "Then help me." The older woman's eyes glistened, but she said nothing. As Evelyn turned to leave, Myra whispered, "They all disappear. Eventually." The words haunted her as she climbed the hill toward the house again, the camera swinging at her side. She hadn't planned to return so soon, but the fear gnawed at her. It wasn't just curiosity now. It was a sense of unfinished business. Something in that house was awake, and she needed to understand it. The wind had picked up. Leaves scattered along the driveway like whispers trying to flee. As she approached the porch, a low rumble passed beneath her feet. Not thunder, closer, a tremor. The house vibrated faintly, just once, like a heartbeat. Inside, everything was as she'd left it. She returned to the second floor, heart pounding, breath shallow. The chair remained by the window, still and silent, but the air was heavier, thicker. It pressed against her chest like a weight. She turned on the camera and set it up again, then sat cross-legged across the room. She spoke aloud. "I don't want to hurt you," she said. "I want to understand." Silence. She waited. Then came a sound, soft, faint, unmistakable. A voice, a woman's voice, sobbing. Evelyn's eyes widened. It wasn't from outside the house. It came from inside the room. The temperature dropped sharply. Her breath fogged. The chair rocked once, and then again she bolted, camera in hand, down the stairs, through the front door. She didn't stop running until she was halfway back to town. Her legs ached. Her lungs burned. Back in her room, she collapsed in front of her desk, trembling hands loading the footage. The camera had caught everything, the rocking, the sobbing, even her voice. But in the background, just beneath the weeping, there was something else. A lullaby, a soft, haunting melody, hummed with sorrow. Almost motherly. She rewound it, listened again. It was faint but deliberate. She searched the archives again for anything, newspapers, letters, journals, that mentioned music, lullabies, songs. And there it was, a small note in Emery's final letter to his cousin. She hums the tune still, even in her sleep, the one she sang before the silence took her. It calms her. "So I pretend. The implications chilled her. Evelyn couldn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the lullaby. When she awoke in the dark, she swore the melody was drifting through the walls. By morning, she looked pale, exhausted, yet more determined than ever. She returned to Harlow's one last time. Thomas looked up, resigned. "She's trying to speak," Evelyn said. He nodded once. "Or trying to be heard. Someone else needs to listen. Someone who won't run." His face darkened. The last person who tried to listen disappeared. "I'm not them." He studied her a long moment. "No, you're not." That night, Evelyn sat by the window of her room, eyes fixed on the house in the distance. The trees shivered in the wind, and faintly, just faintly, she thought she saw the silhouette of the chair, moving once again. The camera sat ready. Tomorrow she would return. But this time, she wouldn't just record, she would speak. The house greeted her with silence, not the peaceful kind but the dense, suffocating quiet that presses into the bones. Evelyn stepped across the threshold once more, a voice recorder in her pocket, her breath measured and deliberate. This time she spoke aloud. "Lydia," she said softly, "if you're here, I'm listening." The air didn't shift, the shadows didn't move, but something unseen responded, an awareness, a presence that curled around her like smoke. She climbed the stairs slowly, each creak like a question. The second-floor room waited, untouched, unchanged. The chair stood facing the window, its back turned to her. She placed the recorder on the floor and sat opposite it. "I've read Emery's letters," she said. "I know he didn't let you leave. I know he tried to hold on after you were gone." No response. "Not yet." "I don't think you wanted this," she whispered. "But I don't think you're at peace." Stillness. She clicked the recorder off after 10 minutes of silence and left, feeling more defeated than frightened. But that night, she played the tape. The static crackled. Her voice came through clearly. Then came the quiet, and then something else. At first just faint breathing, then a voice, frail, distant, but unmistakable. "Why won't he let me go?" Evelyn sat bolt upright. She rewound the tape. The words were there, soft, barely audible, but undeniably real. It was Lydia. The next day, Evelyn returned, more determined than ever. She brought with her a candle and a small wind chime, both items known for their use in old spiritualist practices. She wasn't looking to perform a séance, but she wanted Lydia to know she was welcome. Inside the house, she lit the candle and placed the chime near the window. Then she sat down, recorder running. "Lydia," she said, voice steady, "I heard you. I want to help." The air chilled subtly but noticeably. The candle flickered. The chime tinkled once, though no breeze passed. Then Evelyn heard it. A quiet hum, a lullaby. She knew the tune from the recording. This time it wasn't through headphones. It came from the chair. It was being sung aloud. Evelyn turned slowly, heart hammering. No one was there. And yet the chair rocked, not wildly, not with fury, but gently, rhythmically, as if cradling an invisible child. She didn't run. Instead, she whispered, "I believe you." The humming stopped. And a voice, not through the air but through her mind, rose softly, broken. "He locked the door. He kept the key. He said he'd fix me." Evelyn trembled. "I know," she whispered. "He wrote everything down. He tried to preserve you, but he didn't ask you what you wanted." The voice grew clearer. "Let me go." Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes. She hadn't come to release a ghost. But now she realized she might be the only one who could. Later that night in her room, she transcribed everything from the tape. Lydia's voice had returned, soft but consistent. Broken phrases, pleas, memories not her own. And for the first time, Evelyn heard something else in her own voice. Compassion. This wasn't about uncovering a mystery anymore. It was about setting something right. The next day, she returned to the library and asked Myra for any personal belongings archived from the Whitmore estate. Reluctantly, the old woman brought out a box. Inside, Lydia's journal. The first entries were mundane: recipes, shopping lists, observations about the weather. But then came darker lines. Emery says I'm not well, but I remember clearly. It's he who has changed. I asked to visit my sister. He said the air would worsen my condition. I dream of walking beyond the garden gate, but I can't find the key. And then a final entry. He watches me sleep. I pretend. I must pretend. But soon, I won't be able. Evelyn closed the journal with trembling hands. Lydia hadn't died of illness. She had died in captivity. Back in the Whitmore house, Evelyn held the journal in her lap and whispered, "I found your words." A wind passed through the room, the candle flickered again, and the chair rocked once, then stopped. Evelyn whispered, "What do you want me to do?" For a long time, nothing. Then a voice so faint it might have been the breeze. "So, tell them." The attic door was concealed behind a rotting bookshelf, its latch rusted shut. Evelyn had noticed the warped outline days earlier, but only now did she feel drawn to open it. The floor groaned beneath her weight as she pried the latch loose and climbed the narrow, dust-choked steps. The attic was black as pitch, the air stale and unmoving, but something urged her forward. Her flashlight flickered, then caught on something tall, curved and veiled. A mirror. It stood at the far end of the attic, draped in an old linen sheet. She hesitated, every instinct urging caution, but curiosity, as always, was stronger. With a single tug, the cloth fell away. The mirror was full length, gilded in tarnished gold. The glass was smudged, but intact. Evelyn stepped in front of it. No reflection. She blinked, leaned closer. Still nothing. Then the glass shifted, not with light or movement, but with time. Suddenly the attic was gone. In its place, she saw a lavish parlor lit by candlelight. The walls were pristine, lined with oil paintings. The rocking chair sat at the center, Lydia Whitmore curled within it like a shadow. Evelyn's breath hitched. She wasn't watching a reflection, she was watching the past. Lydia turned her head, staring not through the mirror, but at someone behind it. Emery Whitmore stood nearby, pacing. His face was taut, eyes sunken. He muttered to himself, the words inaudible. Lydia said nothing, her hands resting limp in her lap. Evelyn couldn't look away. Emery stopped pacing. He knelt beside Lydia, took her hand. "You're still here," he whispered. "I know you are." Lydia didn't respond. Her lips were moving, but not with speech, just soft repetition. Evelyn leaned in, heart pounding. Then the image blurred, like fog drifting through memory. It cleared again. Now the room was different, darker, colder. Lydia sat alone, eyes vacant, her dress wrinkled and torn. The chair rocked gently, though she didn't move. Evelyn watched as Emery re-entered. His expression had changed, no longer desperate, calm, serene. He carried a journal, sat at a desk, and began to write. "She remains quiet," he wrote aloud, "but I feel her presence. Her soul is bound." He turned toward Lydia and smiled. "She's perfect." The mirror flickered again. This time Evelyn saw the moment of Lydia's death. There was no violence, just stillness. Emery stood over her, hand on her shoulder, whispering to her as she drifted into unconsciousness. Her body slumped forward in the chair, but Emery did not cry. He simply pressed a kiss to her forehead and whispered, "You'll never leave me." The vision vanished. The attic returned. Evelyn stepped back from the mirror, gasping for breath, tears hot on her cheeks. Her legs trembled. She collapsed to the floor, heart racing. She had seen it. Not a story, not a suggestion, the truth. Lydia had been kept, controlled, and finally, preserved. Emery hadn't tried to help her. He'd tried to trap her essence, her will, her very being within the chair, and he had succeeded. The house hadn't just remembered, it had recorded. The mirror was a conduit, a witness. Still shaking, Evelyn rose and took one last look at the mirror. For a second, her own reflection returned, but behind her, barely visible, Lydia stood. She didn't move. didn't speak. She simply waited. Downstairs, Evelyn pored over her notes, trying to stitch together what she'd learned. The pieces were falling into place. Emery's obsession with spiritual preservation. Lydia's loss of voice, freedom, life. The chair as an anchor, the mirror as a memory, but one question clawed at her. Why show her this now? She flipped through Lydia's journal again. On the final page, beneath the last words, something faint shimmered in pencil. Evelyn held it to the light. A symbol. A circle bisected with 4 lines crossing through. She had seen it before. On the floorboards beneath the rocking chair, a ritual mark. Evelyn's stomach turned. Emery hadn't only recorded Lydia's presence, he'd performed something, bound her through a rite. The chair hadn't been haunted. It was an altar. She rushed back upstairs, searching for more clues. Old books, loose papers, anything. Tucked beneath a broken floorboard, she found a torn scrap of parchment. On it, faded ink and familiar handwriting. To preserve what slips beyond, anchor to memory, to voice, to seat, to sustain the soul, deny the passage. It wasn't medical. It was a spell. Evelyn sat back, heart thunderous. She understood now. Emery had used Lydia's own body, her voice, her presence, her favorite chair, to seal her in place. She hadn't passed on. She had been chained. The weight of this truth pressed on Evelyn like stone. The horror was no longer spectral. It was intimate, personal, and she couldn't escape it. From below, the floor creaked. The chair had moved again. And now, it waited. Evelyn stood in the parlor, the rocking chair motionless before her, the silence almost reverent. Her hands were dusted with dirt and ink from the attic, her mind still reeling from what she'd uncovered. Emery Whitmore had not been driven by grief alone. He had been guided by a doctrine, one of control, ritual, and unyielding obsession. The symbol carved into the floor beneath the chair wasn't decorative, it was deliberate, a seal. She knelt beside it now, tracing the edges with her fingertip. The grooves were shallow but meticulous. It had taken time, intent. She remembered the parchment from the attic, its instructions for spiritual anchoring. Deny the passage. Emery hadn't believed Lydia was gone. He had made sure she wasn't. Back in the study, once Emery's private office, Evelyn pulled open drawers long stuck with age. Inside were fragments of a man unraveling, unsent letters, unfinished diagrams, annotated volumes on mesmerism, necromancy, and theosophy, notes scrawled in margins with growing desperation. Her essence flickers, but the chair holds her. She speaks through the wood. She answers when I'm still. Her silence isn't death, it's distance. Among the journals, Evelyn found a booklet labeled Session Records. Inside were dated entries cataloguing attempts to reach Lydia's spirit. The first few were clinical, almost scientific in tone, but the further she read, the more erratic they became. Session 1. Subject unresponsive. Pulse irregular. Applied laudanum to calm. Reaction minimal. Session 4. Chair moved faintly. Lydia's eyes opened. She wept. I believe this means progress. Session 11. Lydia refuses speech. She hums only. I have begun humming back. She responds to familiar tones. Session 16. Her body is fading. Her soul must be preserved before full separation. There were no details beyond that point, only drawings. Diagrams of the chair surrounded by ritual circles, arrows pointing to symbols, notes on placement. One line was underlined 3 times. Do not sit upon her throne. Evelyn stared at those words. It was a warning, a command, or maybe a desperate plea. She closed the book and turned back toward the parlor. The rocking chair remained perfectly still, but it no longer seemed like furniture. It was an instrument, a prison, and Lydia was still inside. Downstairs, she opened a cabinet and found another box of Emery's effects. Inside were audio reels, recordings from the early 1900s, their spools fragile. She didn't have the tools to play them, but she recognized their significance. He had tried to record her voice, not memories, actual consciousness. In town, Evelyn visited the old museum near the school. hoping to find playback equipment. The curator, an elderly woman named Ruth, offered her access to a crank-operated phonograph in the storage room. Evelyn threaded the tape carefully, fingers shaking, breath caught in her chest. The voice that emerged was faint and warped, but unmistakable. Lydia. She was humming. The same lullaby. Over and over. Then Emery's voice cut in, sharp and near manic. "Lydia, I speak to me." No response. "I know you're still with me. I've done everything. I've preserved your place." More humming. Softer. "I've locked the room. I've sealed your name. I've denied your exit. I've brought you back." The reel cut out. Ruth looked pale. That house should be burned to the ground. Evelyn returned before dusk. This time she carried with her everything, the letters, the recordings, the diagrams, Lydia's journal. She laid them around the rocking chair, forming a ring of remembrance and truth. She didn't light candles, she didn't chant. She simply sat across from the chair and whispered, "I know what he did." "I know you're still bound." The house remained still. "I'm sorry," she said. The air grew colder, and the chair rocked once. Evelyn felt the shift, not physical but emotional, as though the house itself had exhaled, as though Lydia had acknowledged her. She opened Lydia's journal and read the final entry aloud. "He watches me sleep. I pretend. I must pretend. But soon, when I won't be able." The candle nearby flickered, and then, for the first time, Evelyn heard Lydia speak without tape or recording. "I remember the garden," the voice said, brittle and sad. "I miss the sun." Tears spilled down Evelyn's cheeks. "I'll help you find it." Silence. Then a whisper. "He won't let me." Evelyn whispered back, "Then I'll make him." The days grew shorter. The snow dusted the streets of Dunsgrave. Evelyn barely noticed. She no longer visited the library or the store. She stayed in the house. It had begun subtly, a shift in her perception of time. Minutes slipping past like water through fingers. She would sit across from the rocking chair, blink, and find that hours had passed. Her thoughts no longer felt entirely her own. Some came in phrases she didn't recognize, others in a voice she barely remembered learning. Lydia's. Evelyn dreamt of her constantly now, not as a ghost, but as herself, whole, living. Sometimes she stood in the garden, sunlight on her face. Sometimes she sat in the parlor singing to no one, but always, always in the chair. At first Evelyn believed it was empathy, the weight of Lydia's pain settling into her bones. But the changes deepened. She began speaking to herself, only realizing after the words left her mouth. She reached for items she didn't own, hummed melodies she had never learned, and found herself tracing ritual patterns in dust without realizing it. She documented everything in her notebook. Day 1. Dreams more vivid. Feel connected, not scared. Day 3. Heard Lydia's voice in waking hours. Said my name. Day 5. Lost 3 hours. No memory. Day 6. Sat in the chair. She hadn't meant to. It had been early morning, cold and grey. She was exhausted, mind clouded. She wandered into the parlor, saw the chair, and thought just a moment. The second her body touched the wood, the room vanished. She wasn't in the Whitmore house anymore. She was in a different parlor. Firelight danced across polished floors. Emery stood by the hearth, younger, smiling. Lydia sat by the window, her face aglow. Evelyn looked down and saw her own hands, thin, pale, ringed in lace. She was Lydia. It lasted only seconds, but the feeling lingered like perfume. When she awoke, she was on the floor. The chair was still. Her notebook was open to a page she hadn't written. "He's coming." She slammed the book shut. That afternoon, Sheriff Thorne came knocking. A burly man with sharp eyes. He had heard she'd returned to the house. Locals were worried. Some claimed lights flickered near the property at night. Others whispered of humming, low, constant, sorrowful. Evelyn answered the door slowly, pale and hollow-eyed. "You need to leave that place," Thorne said. "I don't care what you're chasing. It's not worth your life." She stared past him. "She's still here." Thorne stiffened. "I don't want to hear that." "She needs help." He stepped forward. "Miss Markham, You've been in this town for weeks. People are uneasy. Things are changing. So help me, she whispered. He shook his head. You're scaring them. And I don't think you're well. That night Evelyn dreamed again. But this time she wasn't Lydia. She was Emery. She stood over the chair, journal in hand, watching Lydia fade. Her mouth moved, but Evelyn couldn't hear what was said. Her body wrote words she couldn't see. Then Lydia screamed, and Evelyn woke gasping, drenched in sweat, nails bloody from gripping the mattress. She stumbled to the parlor. The chair rocked violently. She screamed Lydia's name. The chair stopped. In the stillness that followed, she heard it. A voice, not Lydia's, deeper, colder. You opened the door. She turned slowly. Nothing there. She fled the house, snow crunching beneath her boots. She pounded on Thomas Baird's door, frantic, breathless. He opened, eyes wide. I saw him, she said. Not Lydia, him. Thomas let her in, poured bourbon, waited. He's still here, she said. Emery. Not just a memory, not just echoes. Thomas stared into his drink. Then you're already marked. What do you mean? He looked up, sorrow in his eyes. He chooses who sees. If you've heard his voice, you're part of it now. Evelyn's hands trembled. Sheriff Thorne, she said. He came to the house. Thomas went still. What? He was there this afternoon. Thomas grabbed his coat. Where is he now? Evelyn shook her head. I don't know. I haven't seen him since. Together they drove through the night, snow swirling around the headlights. They reached the sheriff's office, empty, no signs of struggle, but on the desk lay Thorne's badge, cold and glistening. And beside it a single hairpin. Evelyn recognized it. It was Lydia's. The walls had started to speak. At first it was subtle, a distant knock, a faint creak, the brush of wind against floorboards. But now the house was alive with noise, soft tapping behind plaster, muffled weeping in empty rooms, doors whispering shut when no one touched them. Evelyn wandered the Whitmore house like a ghost, notebook in one hand, lantern in the other. She had abandoned her rented room. She barely ate. She rarely slept. The house welcomed her, or claimed her. It was hard to tell the difference anymore. She scribbled what she heard, what she saw, what she remembered, though memory was a slippery thing these days. She found herself writing phrases in handwriting that wasn't hers, in words she didn't understand. Her dreams bled into waking life. She no longer knew which moments belonged to Lydia, to Emery, or to herself. The badge lay on the mantel. Sheriff Thorne had not returned. No search party was organized. No posters hung. The town had gone quiet, as if bracing itself, as if it already knew. Evelyn sat in the parlor, eyes on the chair. It had not rocked in 2 days. That worried her more than the tremors, the voices, the cold. It was waiting. She turned her attention to the floor beneath it, where the symbol had been carved. She traced its edges again and again. Something about its design called to her, a balance of geometry and intention. It was not just a seal, it was a story. She had seen parts of it in Lydia's journal, in Emery's diagrams, but it was incomplete. There had to be more. She descended into the basement. The steps were rotten, the air stale and wet. The faint smell of iron drifted through the dark. Her lantern flickered but did not fail. The basement was cluttered with old furniture, shattered glass and decaying crates, but one corner was cleared. Deliberate, swept clean. At its center, a crude circle had been painted onto the concrete floor, dark and flaking with age. Symbols lined the edges, matching those beneath the chair. In the middle of the circle, a small, rusted tin box. She opened it. Inside were teeth, human teeth, and a lock of dark hair, bound in a ribbon. Evelyn reeled back, nausea rising. But then she saw the paper tucked beneath the box, a final entry in Emery's own hand. Lydia's light flickers. The tether weakens. I must sacrifice more. Fragments of self, pieces of her. Memory, flesh, echo. If the bond breaks, she will pass. I will lose her. I cannot lose her. She clutched the page. That's what the voices were. Echoes, leftovers of all he had taken. Her hair, her blood. Her words. They lingered, not because of death, because of theft. The house cried out again, louder this time. A thump in the ceiling, a sob through the pipes. Evelyn raced upstairs. She reached the second floor and heard humming. Not soft now, but sharp, commanding, as if someone were forcing the melody through clenched teeth. It was Lydia, or something using her voice. Evelyn stepped into the bedroom. The mirror had fogged, and in it she saw herself, but not entirely. Her face was older, her eyes dark. She wore a lace collar. Lydia. No. She blinked. The vision vanished, but the humming remained. She stumbled back to the parlor where the chair finally moved again, just once, then twice. Evelyn dropped to her knees. I found it, she whispered. The ritual. The fragments. I know what he did. The chair creaked louder. I'll undo it, she said. I'll find a way. The lights flickered, then blew out. In the dark, something moved through the house. Not footsteps, but presence, like an invisible thread pulling tighter around her limbs. She crawled toward the door, but the air thickened, resisting her, and in her ear, a voice. His voice. You were warned, she gasped. The air vanished from her lungs. Then, in a single flash, it stopped. She woke hours later on the floor, bruised, breathless, her notebook soaked in water. The fireplace was lit, her coat draped over the chair. She hadn't done that, she didn't remember any of it, but in her lap lay a journal page, one she hadn't written. He's breaking through. Evelyn looked at the walls, at the floor, at the mirror. They weren't haunted, they were wounded, and they were bleeding. Evelyn could no longer deny it. She had become the final witness, the last participant in a ritual she never consented to, and perhaps the last key. Her voice recorder was the only thing she still trusted. Every day she logged her thoughts, observations, fears, but now it served another purpose, a testimony. She sat before the chair, the recorder between them. This is Evelyn Markham, she said, her voice low, cracked. It's December 3rd. I've spent nearly 6 weeks in the Whitmore house. I believe I'm no longer alone in my thoughts. She paused. The house creaked. Outside, snow tapped at the windows like waiting fingers. I've seen visions of Lydia Whitmore, dreams, reflections, even memories that don't belong to me. I've seen Emery's rituals. I've heard his voice. The house contains more than energy. It holds echoes, trapped moments, repetitions of grief, control, obsession. Her fingers trembled as she reached into her coat. She unfolded Lydia's final journal page, flattened it beside the recorder. He sealed her inside, not out of love, but possession. He couldn't let her go, so he made sure she couldn't leave. The chair remained still. But now, she whispered, he won't let me go either. She reached into her bag and retrieved the photograph, the one from the archive, faded and yellowing. Lydia in the chair. Emery standing behind her. Evelyn placed it on the floor. I believe the ritual still holds, she said. The anchor remains, the chair, the seal, but it's weakening. That's why the visions are bleeding through. That's why the house is more active. Something is unraveling. She closed her eyes. And I think I've been marked to finish it. She pressed record again. If I don't return, if I disappear like the others, someone needs to know. This isn't folklore, it isn't hysteria. The Whitmore house contains an unresolved act, a woman stolen from death, a man who refused to grieve. She paused, then added, I'm going to sit in the chair again. She clicked the recorder off. Everything felt too quiet. She rose slowly and walked to the chair. Her body moved on its own. She wasn't afraid, not anymore. Fear had been replaced by purpose, a heavy, inevitable sense of convergence. She sat. The room darkened, not with shadows, but with silence. Then came the hum, soft, lulling. Lydia. But it was different now. The hum grew louder, sharper. A second voice joined it, Emery's, deep, urgent. The two melodies clashed, spiraled. Evelyn's vision blurred. The house fell away. She was inside a memory not her own. Lydia stood before her, eyes wide, hands clutching her belly. Emery circled her, chanting under his breath. The symbols glowed beneath their feet. Lydia screamed, raw, defiant. "No more," she cried. "You won't keep me here." Then Evelyn was Lydia. Her chest heaved, her voice cracked. And Emery stepped forward, pressing his hand to her heart. "You're mine," he whispered. Evelyn's own heart thundered. She screamed, not in fear, but rage. The ritual was repeating itself. This time, she would end it. With every ounce of will, Evelyn forced herself to remember who she was. Her name, her voice, her purpose. "You are Evelyn, you are not his." She reached for the recorder with shaking fingers and pressed play. Her own voice filled the space. "I am not yours." The vision cracked. The room split open like glass. Voices howled. Light flooded the parlor, and Emery was there, not as flesh, but shadow, hovering over the chair, clawing toward her. Evelyn stood. "I'm not Lydia," she said. "And you don't get to choose anymore." She took the journal, the photograph, the ritual page, and tossed them into the fire. The shadows screamed. The chair rocked once, then stilled, and then silence. Total. For the first time in over a century, the Whitmore house stopped speaking. Evelyn collapsed beside the hearth, breath ragged, skin soaked in sweat. She reached for the recorder one last time. "I think it's done." The townsfolk noticed first. The light in the Whitmore house had gone out. No one had seen Evelyn Markham for 3 days. Her rented room above the post office remained untouched, bed still made, breakfast coupon unused. The door was locked from the inside. Thomas Baird was the first to raise concern. He knocked at the sheriff's office, but no one answered. Sheriff Thorne, too, was still missing. Rumors buzzed like flies around a corpse. Some whispered Evelyn had gone mad. Others said the house had finally claimed her. One person didn't wait. Her name was Clara Weston, a fellow journalist and Evelyn's closest friend. When she received Evelyn's final letter, brief, cryptic, postmarked a week late, she boarded the next train from Boston. "If you don't hear from me again," it read, "start at the chair." Clara arrived in Dunsgrave under a grey sky, her coat buttoned tight, her eyes sharper than most in town had seen in years. She didn't stop at the inn. She went straight to the house. The gate hung open, the front door unlatched. Inside, the Whitmore house was cold and still. Dust settled over every surface, except the chair. It sat pristine, untouched, unspecked, waiting. Clara called Evelyn's name once, twice, no answer. She explored each room, documenting everything. Notes left behind, a melted wax ring near the hearth, Evelyn's recorder, cracked but intact, beneath the parlor table. She took it with her, heart heavy, dread settling like ash. That night, Clara listened. Evelyn's voice filled the room, distant, strained. Not folklore, not hysteria. The house contains an unresolved act. And later, another tone, more urgent, breathless. "He won't let me go either." Then silence, no conclusion, no sign-off. The final recording cut off abruptly with static and the faintest whisper, "I think it's done." But Evelyn had not returned. Clara spent the following days retracing Evelyn's steps, visiting the library, speaking to Thomas, inspecting the basement and attic. She uncovered everything: Lydia's journal, the ritual diagrams, Emery's notes. It felt like living someone else's dream or nightmare. But what haunted Clara most was the subtle shift in photographs. She found a portrait Evelyn had taken of the chair, 1 week before her disappearance. When Clara held it beside a recent photo from the recorder case, she noticed something impossible. The woman in the older photo was Evelyn. The woman in the newer one was not. Same frame, same chair, different posture, different face, and yet familiar. Clara stared long into the night, matching Lydia's old portraits to the figure in the recent shot. The resemblance was undeniable, not identical, but echoing. She opened Evelyn's notebook again. The last legible sentence was a question, scrawled over and over. What if the anchor shifts? Clara's breath caught in her throat. What if the ritual hadn't been broken? What if it had merely changed hands? On her fourth night in Dunsgrave, Clara awoke with a scream. She had dreamed of a woman in white humming beside her bed, rocking slowly in the chair, Evelyn's voice rising through the tune. But in the dream, Clara couldn't move, couldn't breathe, and when she finally awoke, the melody still hung faintly in the room. She checked her recorder. It had been running. On playback, static fuzzed the first 10 minutes, then faintly, unmistakably, the creaking of wood, a chair, rocking, alone. Clara left the house at dawn, frost coating the grass. She didn't lock the door behind her. Some truths didn't need to be contained. They needed to be left behind. Back in town, she mailed everything to her editor, the photos, the notes, the recordings. She left no message. Just one sentence scribbled inside the notebook cover. The Whitmore house doesn't take people, it trades them. Clara hadn't intended to stay. She'd come to find Evelyn, document the truth, and leave. But the house wouldn't let her. The Whitmore house tugged at her thoughts like a loose thread. She told herself it was curiosity, guilt, grief. But each day she lingered, her body felt heavier. Her mind stretched thinner. She returned to the house on the 5th day, notebook in hand, under the pretense of closing the investigation. She told no one, didn't even leave a note. The key still worked. The door creaked open like it had been waiting. Inside, nothing had changed. And that was the problem. The chair remained immaculate. The dust refused to settle. Evelyn's belongings were still in place, her coat, her recorder, her final notes. Clara reached for the notebook again. Her hands trembled. There was a smell in the air now, faint lavender touched with old wood and candle wax. Lydia, or maybe Evelyn. She sat in the parlor, reading Evelyn's last full entry again. If the anchor shifts, it must have a host, a vessel. One willing or unaware. Clara paused, looked around the room and began to notice. Photos in frames, once clearly Evelyn, had altered, slightly, subtly. The jaw softened, the eyes turned inward, the hair darkened. It was Lydia, but now the face shifted again. This time it looked like Clara. She dropped the photo. In her notebook she scribbled a note in haste. Identity is fluid inside the house. Echoes find new forms. She turned to the mirror on the wall. It reflected the room faithfully, until she looked directly at it. Then it blinked. For a fraction of a second, she saw Evelyn seated behind her, not as she was before, but older, paler, changed. Clara spun around. Nothing. The mirror didn't lie. It remembered. She backed away and stumbled into the dining room. The table had been cleared. Evelyn's journal lay open there, on a page Clara didn't recall seeing before. To unseat what has been anchored, one must offer something in return. Clara's mind reeled. Evelyn hadn't broken the ritual. She had replaced herself in it. The Whitmore house hadn't freed Lydia. It had reshaped her, and now it was watching Clara. That night, she slept in the house. She told herself she wanted to understand, to record it from within, but in truth she couldn't leave. She dreamt of Evelyn again, sitting in the rocking chair, hands folded, face serene. But she didn't speak. She simply pointed. To Clara. When she awoke, her notebook had a new entry, written in Evelyn's handwriting. She fits. The descent began slowly. Clara started forgetting the time. She spoke to herself without realizing. She reached for objects that weren't there and responded to voices no one else could hear. She reread Lydia's journal aloud, just to feel the words in her mouth. Each page felt familiar, intimate. Her handwriting began to mimic Lydia's script, and then the humming started. She caught herself humming while making tea, while brushing her hair, while writing. It wasn't a tune she knew, but it was one she'd heard before, the lullaby. She recorded herself once out of dread. The playback confirmed it. It wasn't her voice. She visited the town just once to clear her thoughts. No one recognized her. Even Thomas Baird paused when she entered Harlow's, eyes narrowed, expression troubled. "Are you—" He didn't finish the question, and Clara didn't answer. She returned to the house, to the chair. to the place where memory bled into identity. She sat across from it, notepad clutched to her chest, and whispered, "I know what you're doing." The chair didn't move. "I won't be next," she said. But her voice trembled, because deep down she already knew. She wasn't Clara anymore, not fully, and the house was very, very patient. Clara knew she didn't have much time. The house was swallowing her, memory by memory. Her handwriting had fully changed now, Lydia's curls and flourishes where her usual straight lines had been. Her voice echoed with an unfamiliar cadence, and the lullaby never stopped. It followed her everywhere, but she had one advantage Evelyn didn't. She hadn't yet sat in the chair, not fully, not consciously. And she didn't plan to. She scoured Evelyn's notes, Lydia's journal, and Emery's diagrams for a thread, anything to reverse what had been done. The answer was always the same, written in different ways. To unseat the soul, the source must be confronted. Lydia hadn't been saved because her captor had never been brought to account. Emery had never been exorcised from the space he'd corrupted. His body was never buried, never punished. His presence remained, and somewhere inside this house, so did he. Clara began searching, behind broken panels, beneath floorboards, through the cellar walls, until finally, in the farthest corner of the basement, she found it. A hollow under the stone marked by old ritual symbols barely visible beneath grime. She dug with her bare hands. Bone. Rotten cloth. A ring. Emery's remains. They had been hidden, not buried, as if even the house wanted to forget him. Clara knelt in the dirt, breath frozen in her chest. Her fingers shook as she pulled the bones free, one by one. At the bottom, a small book, sealed shut with wax. She pried it open. Inside, Emery's final confession. Her soul remains, but her will fades. I fear I have gone too far. I no longer see her. I see only her echo. I preserved nothing but my own guilt. Clara lit a lantern, struck a match, and held it over the book. The flame caught, pages curled, heat rose, and the house began to scream, not with sound, but with resistance. The walls pulsed, the floor shook. Wind surged from nowhere. She ran upstairs, heart pounding, bones clutched in her arms. In the parlor, the chair was rocking violently. She didn't flinch. "I found him!" she shouted into the storm. "He doesn't control you anymore." She placed the bones in the hearth, doused them with kerosene from the shed, and struck a match. The flames roared. The chair slammed to a halt. Then, Lydia's voice. Not a moan, not a whisper, but a cry. Raw. Liberated. "Thank you." The mirror shattered. A light poured through the cracks in the walls, and the house, for the first time in decades, began to breathe. Clara staggered back as the wind stilled. The heat died. The silence returned. Not the suffocating kind. A peace. She turned to the chair. It no longer rocked. It sat motionless, empty. She approached slowly, cautiously. One hand out. Nothing moved. No voice. No creak. No presence. It was finally just a chair. She collapsed to the floor, tears streaming down her face. It was over. Lydia was gone. Emery was gone. And so was Evelyn. But they hadn't vanished. They had been released. As the first snow of the season began to fall outside, Clara sat in silence, the last link to a century-long horror now severed. She opened her notebook, pen shaking, and wrote, "The curse is broken." Clara left the Whitmore house before dawn. The snow had fallen thick overnight, muffling the town in soft white silence. She didn't speak to anyone, didn't explain. She simply walked down the hill, past the gate, across the bridge, and never looked back. Inside the house, the chair remained still. No more creaking, no more humming. The echoes were gone. The stillness was real. Back in Boston, Clara sat at her desk weeks later, piecing together everything. Evelyn's notes, the ritual fragments, Lydia's final words. She wrote the full story, not for publication, not at first, but for preservation. Some truths deserved to live. Others needed to rest. She titled the manuscript, "The Chair That Rocked Itself," and when she typed the final sentence, she closed the file, backed it up twice, and stepped away from the keyboard. The Whitmore house, she'd later learned, had been boarded up. The town didn't speak of it again, not out of fear but out of relief, like a wound finally healed. Thomas Baird passed quietly that winter, and with him the last oral accounts of what once haunted those walls. But sometimes Clara still dreamed of it, of Evelyn, of Lydia, of that lullaby, not in fear, but in memory. Peaceful now, resolved. One evening she received a package with no return address. Inside, Evelyn's recorder restored, and a single note in familiar handwriting. "You were right. He doesn't get to choose anymore." Clara smiled softly, tears rising to her eyes. Evelyn was gone, but not lost. And neither was Lydia. The past had been heavy, unrelenting, but it had not been in vain. Clara gave the chair to a local museum. It sat behind glass, untouched, unassuming, silent. Visitors paused before it, curious, maybe skeptical. None ever saw it move. But those who listened carefully said they felt something. A weight lifted, a breath exhaled, a story released. And on nights when the wind howled through Maine's trees, if you stood quietly near the gates of the old Whitmore estate, you might hear nothing at all. And that at last is the point. The curse had ended. The silence was earned. If stories like this haunt you, in all the best ways, subscribe for more forgotten horrors unearthed. Click the video on your screen now for another terrifying tale. Dare to know more.